It is 4 o'clock Eastern Time, and my name is John Bell, the director of the Ballard Institute and Museum of Puppetry, and we are here for our Summer 2020 Online Puppet Forum number 7, a long and unexpected love affair with puppetry, with Penny Francis, our friend who is currently in London and who will appear shortly. I think, Penny, you could unstop your video at this point if you like. This is a series of interviews or conversations more with different puppet scholars and puppeteers and teachers that we decided to do this summer weekly because of the coronavirus situation. And it's been exciting so far. It's part of our online puppetry programs. Hi, Penny. Thank you for being here.
Oh, can you see me? Yes,
Yes,
I can see you.
absolutely.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
So I was saying it's part of our online programming this summer. Today, we're being assisted by our colleague, Emily Wicks, the manager of collections and operations at the Ballard Institute, and Elise Van Ness, who's an undergraduate puppet arts student who, among other things, is creating and conducting amazing puppet workshops that happen Wednesdays and Fridays at 2 o'clock. And those are really worth checking out. So please check those out, people who are watching around the world, perhaps, or in Northeastern Connecticut via Facebook Live. Our last Puppet Forum guest was Jennifer Goodlander from Indiana, talking about puppetry in Southeast Asia. Our next guest is going to be Terry Silvio, who is located currently in Taiwan. I wanted to mention, I think my colleagues are going to be posting various aspects of information about our work at the Ballard Institute, and including donations. If you want to make a donation to the Ballard Institute to help us do this work and all the other programming work we're doing, we would appreciate it. So I'm sure that information will appear. Okay, did I say everything that I wanted to say at the beginning? I think at the end of this wonderful forum, wonderful because Penny's here, we can mention some of the specific puppet workshops that are happening. So Penny, I'm glad to say, is one of the, I guess, major figures in world puppetry, and has been for quite a while. I think I first met you years ago, I don't know what, probably in the context of Bread and Puppet Theater, for whom you've been a big supporter, and maybe also as part of this constellation of amazing women puppeteers that I connect with UNIMA, like Alelu Curtin and Nancy Staub, who've played such an important role in US puppetry and international puppetry. And I know we're going to talk about the work you've done with UNIMA a bit later. But now I am realizing that I want to look at something that I should have gotten together earlier, which is your interesting bio. Excuse me, people of the audience, for this mishegas. So I wanted to mention that Penny was born in Calcutta, India, educated in various private schools in India and England, came back to England. I think we'll see a photo of your being en route back to England. Penny trained and worked first as an actor in the early 1950s, which makes total sense to me. And she married another actor, Derek Francis, in 1954, who was a wonderful and very famous and beloved actor in England, a character actor, I think one could say. He passed away in 1984. Penny had two daughters, Tessa and Julia. Julia passed away in 2008. From 1961, beginning in 1961, Penny became involved with professional puppetry and joined UNIMA in 1966, which is pretty early. She co-founded the Puppet Center Trust in 1974 in England, in London, which has been a real played a central role in British puppetry, and an organization designed to promote and develop the art form, where she initiated a wide-ranging and effective program helping to raise puppetry's profile and status, which is always something that's interesting in terms of our field. The center attracted funding from many institutions. She edited the magazine Animations, which is a really good puppet journal, Animations from England, for 14 years, from 76 to 1990. Organized major international festivals throughout London in 1974, 1984, worked with UNIMA on the publications and cooperations commissions and executive committee, UNIMA, the Union Internationale de la Marionnette, which is based in France, but it's the International Puppet Organization. She was decorated with the Member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire by Queen Elizabeth II for her services to puppetry in 1998. She was a tutor at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama from 92 to 2008, where she developed a lot of teaching of puppetry, and she's still a consultant with the school. She is retired and living in London. I forget what neighborhood in London you live in, Penny.
Clapham.
Chapham?
Clapham.
So Clapham. And through your generosity, I fondly recall being able to stay at your house when I think I was working with Matthew Cohen when he was teaching there. So you're a wonderfully gracious hostess. Penny is a wonderful writer and editor. She edited aspects of puppet theater by Henryk Jurkowski, and also edited his the two-volume History of European Puppetry, which came out in the late 90s. She co-edited UNIMA 2000, The Worldwide Art of Puppetry, and also wrote a recent book, Puppetry, a Reader in Theater Practice, which we're going to talk about in 2012. So that's kind of a rather boring introduction to an incredibly fascinating and energetic and vivacious young lady. No, Penny Francis. Hi, greetings, Penny. Thank you for being here.
Hi. I wish I could see the screen.
Aha. Having trouble seeing the screen?
I can't see the first of the slides.
Okay, let me do that. We wanted to
maybe you didn't want them yet.
Right, maybe I didn't do this yet. So let me share my screen and in my funky way here, and then try to get to the first of these slides.
There we are.
Okay.
There we are.
Okay. I'm sure since I'm doing this is going to be a little bit funky, but anyway, so here we are. What is oh my gosh. Why did you decide to title this A Long and Unexpected Love Affair with Puppetry, Penny?
Excuse me, but I didn't title it. I think you titled it.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. All right.
I don't believe anything at this stage.
Okay.
but has it been a love affair? I mean, I can imagine that. That's an interesting way to define one's relationship with puppetry. I think it was unexpected for you. Like you started out as an actress.
I started off as an actress at a time when in England, puppetry had very little connection with theatre at all. It was mostly an amateur profession done by people with little or no training, and mostly people from the arts and crafts world, not from the theatre world. And I'm very much a theatre person.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of acting how did you get into acting? What was that like? And why did you go into that?
I got into acting by answering an ad in the professional journal called The Stage. But the whole thing was, well, how I got into puppetry is perhaps a little bit more interesting. I don't know. But I went into the theatre and weekly rep and fortnightly rep, and then a tour of 32 of the United States of America as Eliza Doolittle in Pygmalion.
Oh, really?
And you know, that was some introduction to America. That was fabulous.
Let me go back to this photo of you, and again, I apologize for all of the gnarliness of everything I'm going to do here. This is what at the age of 9, and you said you're returning, or you're going from
on board ship between England and Calcutta. I'm not sure where I am at that point, but anyway, and they were wonderful voyages. One went to and fro every couple of years when my father got leave. He was based in Calcutta.
And so when did you move back to England for good at around the age of 9?
No, I moved back at the age of 13.
Oh, okay.
And the war broke out when I was 9. Did it? Yes, 1931. I was 8 when the war broke out. But I was blissfully ignorant of the whole thing. And I was also blissfully ignorant of the fact that I was holding a puppet. I never called it a puppet, but that's exactly what I was doing, as you can see. It's a koala.
Were you in London during the war, or were you out in the country during the war?
No, I was in Calcutta and in my schools, my small private schools in the Himalayas, in the foothills of the Himalayas. We used to call them the hills. Mm-hmm. And I had a pretty happy time because the schools were tiny, sometimes only 15 or 20 pupils, and they were more like house parties, really. But there was a certain amount of education, although I never learned a single thing about science, I'm afraid.
And we were talking earlier, I wondered if you had run into any of the really amazing Indian puppet traditions when you were growing up as a kid, and you said actually that wasn't part of your exposure to Indian culture.
I'm sorry to say that that it was the time of the Raj, and in Calcutta, the cutoff between the Indians and the resident Brits was very severe. And when I was growing up, I knew Indians only as servants, I'm afraid.
I wanted to show this next photo, and I think this is actually, I got a little ahead of myself. Maybe you were aware of A.R. Philpott's work before you became an actor, but you wanted to share this photo of Philpott, who was a pretty important British puppeteer in, I guess, beginning in the post-war years.
He was a bit of a pioneer of educational puppetry. No,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't meet him until I'd been an actor for some time, but he really was trying to get educational and therapeutic puppetry accepted. And he set up something called the Educational Puppetry Association with Violet Philpott.
Okay.
And he was a huge influence on me, and I really loved him. And he died much too soon after I met him.
Why was he what about his work made him a huge influence on you?
It was only that his immersion in puppetry and his dedication to it, and the fact that he was such a nice person. And he was one of my first influences to. I have always just thought that most people in the puppet theatre are quite incredibly nice.
Okay, that's generous. That's what could you talk about what the situation of puppetry was at that time, I guess in the 50s? When
Yes, when I came into it, there was, well, the acting profession really, quite frankly, despised puppetry. It was simply not part of anybody's theatrical life. But skipping a little bit, I came to see what puppetry could be like through my husband, who decided one day to make a show for our two girls when they were children. And he made a production of the Nativity. And yeah, there he was. He was a man of many faces. And he was one of my, I suppose, greatest influences. And he made the most beautiful puppets. And we did quite theatrical shows. And there he is at work. He used to work very quickly. And he left behind, must be about 100 or so puppets. But we only did about 3 shows. And we built a little theatre in our garden in southwest London.
Were these rod puppets or hand puppets?
We started off with marionettes. And I always say that we started at the most difficult end of the spectrum.
Right.
I think marionettes are really very difficult.
Very difficult.
I admire good puppeteers like Rosa and the Middletons. And I just gradually realized that when we had the theatre in our garden, puppeteers started to come and see our shows. And they came in rather large numbers, that it only seated about 20.
Was this because your husband Derek were they friends of the theater, or was it because Derek had connections with the puppet community?
He had no connections with the puppet community until I started really getting into it. But when he made the first show for the girls, the whole thing kind of flew away with us, and we started to have demands from people, all sorts of people, to come and see the theatre and our shows, and it all kind of increased in it. I mean, it was only a hobby for him. He never did it for money. Yeah, it was just lovely. We had some wonderful audiences, including some disabled people, and I remember one day that our living room being full of wheelchairs, and the whole it was all very jolly. But in the meantime, I was sort of building up an appreciation of the art form and realizing that it was being desperately undersold in Britain.
How do you mean that it was being desperately undersold?
Well, it had no status at all.
Mm-hmm.
And very few practitioners who were not also doing amateur stuff on the side. But there were, at that time in the late 1950s, half a dozen or more puppeteers, and I could see that they were artists, real artists.
Are you thinking about like Little Angel Theater or some of the companies that emerged after the war?
John Wright and Lindy Wright were two of the ones that I admired very much. Barry Smith, I thought, was absolutely brilliant. Have you heard of Barry Smith?
I think I've heard his name, and then I'm ignorant. Could you describe Barry Smith's work a little bit?
One of his puppets is there on your slideshow. The picture of the Pierrot.
There's a cue.
The Pierrot, the dancing Pierrot, which is a truly bunraku puppet operated by 3 puppeteers.
Right.
Got it?
Yeah, it just won't
There
take me but a minute, of course.
That one. And he had 5 masks. Sometimes he played with 3 and sometimes he played with 5. And it was really brilliantly done. And the puppeteers are very well masked.
So by masked, do you mean the puppeteers were wearing masks?
No, the Pierrot was wearing, and he had his masks changed. And when he changed his mask, he changed his physicality. And it was quite clever. Sometimes, once he was a very old man, another time he was a jazz dancer. Kept the clothes the same, but the face was changed.
So in the middle of one performance, the character would change for the characters you described?
Yes.
And you use the term bunraku to describe it. So it was puppeteers visibly in front of the audience operating the puppet.
Well, they weren't very visible, but they were. They were there behind him. The photograph masks them completely. But he also had a very clever regard for puppetry. He was a teacher. He really was full of ideas about what puppetry was and could be. And I lapped up all his teaching. He became a very dear friend, and it was terrible when he died, which he did much too soon. And then there was an extraordinary surrealistic glove puppet man called Ted Milton, who was quite mad, but brilliant. And he did a sort of version of Punch and Judy, which was quite unlike anybody else's. And that was really my main inspirations. Barry, Violet Philpott, Ted Milton, John Wright and Lindy, and Panto Philpott.
Amazing. And would you say all of these performers were more or less on a parallel track of thinking about puppetry as an art form, they
were, and they were full of sorrow that it had such low status. There were so many really bad producers, really awful stuff, to the extent that my husband refused to go to any more puppet shows because I took him to a few that were really bad. Excuse me for interrupting you, were the bad shows like shows for kids, or were they more traditional Punch and Judy shows? No, they were more, either shows for kids or they were shows, I don't know who they were for really. But I was so interested in the fact that no matter how bad the show was, the audience was hypnotized. Right. The whole business of the animation of these forms, although later on I decided that puppetry was about fine design and craftsmanship. Even when it was bad and the puppets were badly made, the audiences, and especially the children's audiences, were fascinated to see these bits of material being brought to life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I started to think about the whole situation. And I just became completely immersed in what could be done, if I'm not getting too much ahead of myself, John,
Mm-hmm.
What could be done to improve the situation.
Right.
Because if a puppeteer did a bad show, it pulled down all the others, and people would say, oh no, puppetry is for the birds. And when a very good puppeteer came along, like one of the ones I was talking about,
right,
they were in despair because they
Mm-hmm.
could not find a thinking audience. I mean, really good shows for kids or really adult shows. There was no audience at all for adult shows.
Even though I think like people like Little Angel Theater were trying to do adult shows.
Yes, they did, and that I'm talking about now the late 50s and the early 60s, but they were struggling. My goodness, they were struggling. But they had this gorgeous little temperance hall, which they turned eventually into a delightful theatre. And it's still going years and years later.
Great. Were you aware of puppet shows on the continent in France and Germany at this time?
Well, that started really when myself and a couple of colleagues decided we were going to found a national center for the promotion of puppetry.
Okay. So that's the Puppet Center Trust.
And that was the Puppet Center Trust. And then I started to travel abroad to festivals and to make friends abroad. And that opened up a whole new life for me, and also increased my desire to understand the art form better. And I started to really to prepare what became my life really for the next 20 or 30 years.
I want to pursue that, but just interrupt one of our viewers, Sean Kyoen. Now I realize I don't quite know if I'm pronouncing Sean's last name correctly. He's a great puppeteer and writer. Sean asked if you had any contact with Punch and Judy performers, which is,
but they were suffering in the same way.
They were suffering in the same way.
Absolutely terrible Punch and Judy performers. I saw one trying to do a Punch and Judy show with very obviously Rajasthani Indian puppets, which he'd somehow painted, and there were but there were one or two, well, not one or two, a bit more than that, really lovely performers of Punch and Judy.
Glenn Edwards.
I always went for rather more artistic stuff, but I still have very beloved friends from the Punch and Judy world.
I think for Americans, the Punch and Judy culture in England is so interesting because it's so long-standing and is sort of this innate English-speaking puppet culture that predates all of our ideas about puppetry as an art form, if you will. So it's...
Well, George Speight wrote a history of Punch and Judy, which was later incorporated into his history of the English puppet theatre.
Right.
And that is a brilliant book. And did a huge amount for the status and also for the understanding of the history of puppetry, which turns out to be really quite rich, going back to the 16th or probably even before that, but not documented, of course.
was Spate someone you connected with in I don't
Oh,
know?
I loved him dearly. Yes, we were quite close. And he really encouraged the setting up of the Puppet Center, and became one of the original. We didn't call them board members. I've forgotten what we call them, but anyway, he was one of the original members of the a dozen people who helped to set it up.
So I'm thinking of the Puppet Center Trust. Now hopefully I'm showing this image of the Puppet Center, the Drac Theater, and I was thinking of the Puppet Center Trust as an aspect of your awareness of this puppetry as an art form, and you talked about getting out and seeing a lot more of puppetry on the whole European continent. So could we talk a little bit about Drac and why that was important to you, and maybe other continental companies that you saw around this time?
Well, I started a magazine called Animations,
right?
And as editor, it was a kind of a passport to many different festivals and occasions in Europe, but and beyond. It was a golden time. I discovered so many different kinds of puppetry, so many wonderful things. The Drac Company was a revelation, because Joseph Crofter, he came from the live theatre and was forbidden to practice by the communist regime because he was rather keen on liberty.
And this is in Czechoslovakia, for those who might not be familiar.
Yes, in what is now Czechia, and then before that the Czech Republic, and before that Czechoslovakia. And the thing about Crofter was his choice of dramaturgy. I mean, he took, for instance, that picture you just showed, that was Sleeping Beauty, but it was an aspect of Sleeping Beauty that nobody had ever shown before.
How so?
This was backstage, and the shadow you can see is a ballerina dancing on stage, and we hear the audience beyond that. But this is backstage, and the puppets come out from the drawers and the cupboards, and they come to life, just talking amongst themselves and being invisible to the humans. Every time a human appears backstage, like the stage manager, they disappear back into the cupboards and the drawers.
And did a show like Drac Theater's Cinderella, did that strike you as being a kind of a revelation about the possibilities of puppetry at that time?
Very much so, very much so. And they were recognized as being a real, what can I say, in the vanguard of a whole new era of puppet theater. They just explored ideas and shapes and music and a way of working which was completely collaborative. And it was, I mean, they were invited all over the world, weren't they? I expect you remember that.
Yeah.
Young as you are.
Young as I am. Yeah, sure. And we ended up with Bread and Puppet working with Vera and František, who were longtime designers and puppeteers at Drac Theater, not Crofter, who you mentioned. Were there other puppeteers or puppet companies whose work appeared to you to be equally fascinating or of artistic value at that time?
At that time, one of the major things that happened to British puppetry was the advent of a gentleman called Jim Henson, who came over from the States and started and was invited to make the program of the Muppets in studios in London. And I got to know him, and again, he was an artist, and what he mainly did for British puppetry was he professionalized the whole thing. It had kind of lapsed into a semi-amateur affair in England, but he came and he was looking for puppeteers to work on the Muppets, and he couldn't find them because there was nobody, or very few, who came up to his standards of performance, and he had to go and find some American puppeteers to come and work in London, to our eternal shame.
But didn't the puppeteers who you mentioned earlier, like from Little Angel Theater or Philpott, or
no,
they weren't professional in the way?
They didn't have the style. They didn't have the chutzpah. I don't know. There wasn't. Well, somebody like Barry Smith was just a completely different kettle of fish. He was longing to be in the Muppets, but just because he would have made some money, and the poor man was making no money at all with his artistic puppetry.
What about, like, wasn't now I'm excuse me for not knowing, but like the shows like Thunderbirds Are Go, I'm thinking about, you know, the sort of televised marionette shows.
That was a little later. It was a little later. Let's start. The Muppets. The Muppets started a real trend of puppets on television, and they multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. The programs, I mean. But there was nothing really, in my opinion, to match the Muppets.
And as we know that Henson came to England because I guess J. Arthur Rank had decided that he would produce the Muppet Show.
Oh, no, not J. Arthur Rank. No.
Good. Thank you.
It was Lou Grade.
Lou Grade. Thank you.
Lou Grade. And Lou Grade was very perceptive about the whole thing. And what is more, they came over to do children's television, and he just saw a couple of them. He said, this is for everybody. This is for adults as well as children. And he rescheduled the programs so that they went out late enough for the children, the older children to see it, and early enough for the adults to see it.
And the thought I was articulating not very well was that Henson had not been able to find support for production support in the United States for this puppet show, and so, but he did find that support in England. How did you meet Henson at the time?
Well, not right at the beginning, but very soon I did, and he was very supportive of our efforts in the Puppet Center, and for a lot of things, including when we come on to speaking of Henryk Jurkowski. He helped to support the books that we were producing.
Wonderful. I didn't know.
And he was such a generous, lovely man.
Could you talk a little bit more about the Puppet Center Trust, and you know, I know you started talking about it already, but how this fit into, for example, your increasingly deep understanding of the possibilities of puppetry? What did the Puppet Center Trust want to do?
Increase the knowledge of it, the understanding of it, and the performance of it. And we did so many things. And one of the main things we did was to help to slot it in to mainstream theatre by insisting, whenever there were meetings, equity, and everything that puppetry should be part of theatre. I know it's half fine art and craft as well as theatre, but my interest was in trying to bring these fantastic talents. And I didn't do it alone, of course. There were two other people, who, one of whom was a teacher and did a lot in the Puppet Center, running courses and increasing the knowledge of it as educational. And another man who was a theatre man who did a tremendous amount to help to gather the resources for the Puppet Center, because we had a very good center in Battersea, and we had a library. Somebody donated a wonderful library to us, and we had so much encouragement at the beginning with money and with materials and with all kinds of things, that there was a need, that everybody felt the need. Everybody felt that there was something magical here that they were missing out on. And we helped to bring the possibilities, the potentials. We did it through festivals, we did it through the magazine. We did every possible thing we could think of to bang the drum, as it were.
Did your so the Puppet Center Trust, it had a building in Battersea. Did that include, you mentioned a library? Were there workshop and performance spaces? Was it could puppeteers come and perform their shows or work on their shows or build their shows there?
It was more oriented to encouraging the puppeteers and the festivals, because there was a lot of space, and we were able to put on small exhibitions, but it wasn't really for performances. However, it was in Battersea Arts Centre, which had 2 or 3 excellent performance spaces, and we did present. In fact, at one time, the other people in the building were terrified that puppets were going to take over the entire building, and it was a very large building.
Okay. Was that appealing to you, the idea of taking over the building?
It certainly was, and it would be a fabulous international puppet center. However, other people had other needs, and we just had 2 huge rooms, and we were very well set up. The initial years were the first years were really very exciting, and of course people came to visit, and that way we got to know people from all over the world who dropped in.
And by this time, are you also part of UNIMA? In addition to the Puppet Center Trust, you're playing a role?
Oh yes, I think I was a member of UNIMA before the Puppet Center started. I was not. When did you say I started? 1966, I think.
In UNIMA, I don't think I gave you the correct date. I didn't.
I've got my membership card just here.
Okay. I mean, Puppet Center Trust started in the early 70s, right?
I started in 1974.
74.
I've been a member of UNIMA for some years before that.
I wanted to get to talking about Jurkowski and your collaborations with Jurkowski, which are so important. Maybe from my perspective, but no, it's not from my perspective alone. But a moment ago, you were talking about the task of sort of inserting puppetry or making sure puppetry was part of what I imagine to be the overall British theater scene, which seems to me like it was a lot of kind of bureaucracy or institutional change. Is that the right way to see it? Was it going to meetings and talking with officials to say, you need to be thinking about puppetry?
Yes, well, there was a lot of that. It wasn't especially bureaucracy, or it was just, we were dealing mostly with enthusiasts, the people in theater or dance, or and just saying, hey, you should see some really good puppetry. But Henryk was part of my introduction to the international world. Do you want me to talk about that now?
Let's do that. Now I'm sharing this image of aspects of puppet theater.
He was Polish, and the Polish puppet theater was very, very highly regarded. Of course, it was part of the communist chain of puppet theatres in their empire.
Right.
And Henryk was at one time part of the Polish cultural ministry, and nobody wanted to be in the puppetry department, but he said, "Okay, I'll do it," just thinking that maybe there was a small opportunity to further his interests. And I learned about his work, and I thought it was a crying shame that it was only in Polish and therefore not available for people to read. And he was my teacher. He was my mentor from a very early stage. And I said, we've got to get this work of yours out to a larger public.
How did you learn? How did you meet him, or how did you learn about his work? His work is in Polish at that time, right?
Well, internationally, he was very well known. He was the Secretary General of UNIMA,
right?
And he did a tremendous amount for UNIMA, and I got to know him that way. And so I decided that I had to do something about this, and so I started editing this aspect of puppet theatre. Jim helped with
Jim Henson,
some money, yes.
Yeah.
And after a great deal of work, I finished the editing and was able to bring it to the international festival in Japan, which was a fabulous festival. And we started to sell this book at the festival, and it, I think
it may have been
well.
1988.
Yeah, that's right.
When this came out.
Yes.
Excuse me for interrupting you. Looking at this image of the front cover and the back cover, for me, it's really fascinating to see the ways that Jurkowski's thinking about puppetry, which seemed to me, thinking of what you were saying a moment ago, kind of marking a very different approach, like literary views on puppet theater towards a theater of objects. So this is at the very beginnings, I would say, of thinking about objects and object performance, between literature and plastic art, the language of contemporary puppet theater, the sign systems of puppetry. So thinking about semiotics, which is...
well, he was a great semiotician.
And semiotic study was an early kind of intellectual, scientific, theoretical way to think about puppets, going back to the Moscow Linguistic School and the Prague Linguistic School. Puppets and the Power of the State, which deals with politics and puppetry, and eroticism and puppetry, which is sort of getting into an area that's not really connected with children's entertainment. In other words, I can see why his approach to aspects of the puppet theater could be so remarkable, and it seems like it was that way for you.
It was just the sight of a true academic putting his brain to this art form in a way that I hadn't met before. There were other academics in the world, but very few of them concentrating on the puppet theater. And I was lucky enough to, well, I had the idea of editing his works in English so that people, some people could access it. And it sort of went from there. Afterwards, we did the history of European puppetry, and that was a very, very long business that lasted for quite a few years before I got that done. His English as a lecturer was absolutely lovely, and he was the most charming lecturer. But the writing of English was not great and there were an awful lot I had to smooth.
Could you talk about the process of I don't know how nerdy this is getting for writers and editors and translators, but it basically, from what I understand, it was basically your idea to say, Henryk, you know, we should translate and publish this work you're doing in English.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Penny, on behalf of puppeteers around the world. But and am I right in thinking before you started working with Jurkowski, you had been doing animations, you'd been doing writing and editing there, but you didn't speak Polish, I don't think, and this is a big project. What was that like to work with Jurkowski? You started to talk about
what
that.
happened was he would translate his work into his English, and then I would take over his manuscripts in so-called English and turn them into proper English. And it was a long business, but it was delightful, and he was always a delightful companion.
In the process of doing this translation, was that sort of an education, if you will, for you, like thinking of the different perspectives he brought to puppetry?
Yes, indeed it was. I learned so much, and he used to laugh at me because he said I really wasn't cultured. Academically, I certainly was extremely ignorant, really. I'd got to university, but I was no academic. But he taught me so much about, and I started thinking in theoretical terms about what puppetry really actually was and why it had this universal fascination, which it has, and it's worldwide. There isn't a nation that is set up which doesn't have puppetry as its roots.
We're looking at the cover of the book. I think I first learned about this book from our friend Roman Pasca at a time when he and I were both studying puppetry at Columbia University in New York City. But you can see that, you know, from the first page of the book, you know, he says the historiography of puppets is a comparatively young field, and the first book is 1852, which is a French history, and then his history doesn't appear until 1996, volume 1 here. So it's actually for puppeteers, which is of course what we're talking about. For puppeteers, it's a pretty seminal work for understanding the history of puppetry. And I think we can see here in the table of contents, again, being pretty geeky about it, this is for, right, I guess volume 1. He wants to be pretty complete in his analysis of the range of puppetry chronologically in Europe. It's a European history of from antiquity through the Middle Ages and up to the 19th century, really. But thinking of this table of contents, which is for some reason so fascinating for me, were there surprises for you in dealing with this material with Jurkowski?
Constant surprises. For instance, I'd never heard of Machina Real. I'd never heard of the English comedians. I'd never heard of most of this, and it was a great history lesson. The only other book that I knew of which did touch on a lot of this was George Speight's History of the English Puppet Theatre. That was extraordinarily wide-ranging for something that was called the English Puppet Theatre.
Right. Spate, yeah, Spate is Spate's work also is so important. I like the frontispiece here of the book. All right.
But of course, then after that, there were other histories, and I excuse me, but I found your history of American puppetry that you, what did you call it? American puppet modernism.
Oh, American puppet modernism.
Yes, which I thought was very valuable, and I learned a lot from that.
You're very kind. I mean, that came out in the early 21st century, but they're really similar to what we've been talking about in terms of Jurkowski and his work. There hasn't been really any history of American puppetry since Paul McFarlane's work, which came out in 1940. So Bill Baird had a popular book, but it isn't really a complete history. So it's in our field of puppet history, there's surprisingly few resources, which I guess is why I'm very appreciative of the work you've done with Jurkowski to make that possible. So
Claudia Orenstein is asking a question. Should we answer it?
Okay, when did the translation come out? The first volume of A History of European Puppetry came out in 1996, and the second volume in 1998. And Aspects of Puppet Theater came out in 1988, according to my minimal research.
Yes, it was 1988.
Google.
That was correct.
So,
but I have to say that I'm not surprised that Claudia asked the question, because we had the histories were produced by a publishing house that didn't know very much about producing, distributing, publicizing the histories. So it got a very small audience. I don't know whether they can be reproduced or not. I'm sure they can, but I don't even know whether the original man who published them is alive.
Right, I think it was, yeah, the Edwin Mellon Press, which is in Lewiston. I don't know, it's sort of a low-scale academic press.
Yes. Yes.
So I thought next, I think this is the this next image is, I think that's the table of contents of your book. So no, it's not. What is this?
Or is it? Oh, maybe it is.
I think.
Yes, it is. It is.
Okay, very good. Yes, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
That's a long way ahead.
Not a long way ahead. I wanted to think about the puppetry program at the Central School of Speech and Drama in London. And again, your work here, to my mind, is quite fascinating and important, because the Central School of Speech and Drama, you know, to my relatively naive understanding, is a very important center for actors to train or learn all of the theater arts. So in a way like the Juilliard School in New York. And the creation of a puppetry program there adds that art form to pretty mainstream fundamental aspect of English actor, and I guess other training, professional training. And the Juilliard School, our Juilliard School in New York, doesn't have a puppetry program, right? That's still not considered essential to the training of theater folks. But you started this puppet program at Central School of Speech and Drama.
Well, actually, I didn't start it.
Thank you.
It started by the man who began an aspect of Central School which they hadn't had before.
Who was
They
that?
started a huge art and design program and
Okay.
even built a big building towards it. And his name was Anthony Dean.
Okay.
And he after that after that he went to Winchester University, but he was hugely influential in introducing puppetry into. He said you can't possibly have a school of theatre art and design without including puppetry.
Right.
And so, you know, he added to the status of the art form immeasurably, really.
Did you start teaching pretty early on after the puppet program at Central School of Speech and Drama was created? After
No,
Dean?
I started on it at the beginning.
Yeah.
It was quite funny, really. I was on a panel to choose who would head that particular program. And in the end, I went away to Charleville and got a telephone call saying, would I do it?
Okay. And so you had to design this program at
Yes.
Central School of Speech and Drama for Puppetry. What was that program? What did you think was important for the students to learn?
It was very difficult because I was completely new to the educational world. And there was so much to teach them. So I had some help in composing the program, although I was rather thrown in at the deep end. But somehow we muddled through. We got some lovely students. It became a master's course. It evolved, and I'm still in touch with most of the students. There were very few students. There were not more than half a dozen in any intake any year.
And were these students who were already studying to be actors or designers or playwrights?
Yeah, like that.
And you were
a mixture.
And you were exposing them to puppetry?
Yep, that's a good way of putting it.
And what kinds of, did you do puppet design, puppet movement, puppet history, puppet performance?
Well,
what did it look like?
The course was set up with quite a lot of money and resources, and we had the use of a workshop and very nice spaces in which to teach. And I was able to invite people in, puppeteers in, who knew a great deal more about the making of puppets and different aspects that I didn't know about, but I was able to put it all together into some kind of a program. And I think on the whole, I'm fairly proud of the students, many of whom are still in touch.
What kinds of things did your students do after they left Central School?
Well, many of them are still in the business.
Mm-hmm.
They're still puppeteers, many of them.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not actually puppeteers, or they wouldn't call themselves puppeteers, maybe they would certainly call themselves theatre people. Mm-hmm. And all the time I was learning, because as you know, as a teacher, you learn all the time. And yes, it went on for about 8 or 10 years.
Were you noticing at this time, and I don't know, maybe even before, this shift from more traditional techniques of puppetry, hand puppets, marionettes, rod puppets, to a kind of experimental or innovative use of objects and, you know, a wider range of forms that defines the puppetry we find around us now? Was that an adjustment for you?
No, I'd seen so much innovative and experimental work all over the world, and I had no intention of confining the students to classical forms and classical dramaturgies and all the things that were usually to be seen. So at the end of every year, they had an opportunity to make their own shows. And there was an extraordinary range of stuff. There was Oedipus, for instance, done with vegetables. One of them did that. There was another one which was by Anais Nin, done on an absolutely huge scale, with little doors and they were so. I cannot overstate the amazement I have, the admiration I have at the sheer inventiveness of the average puppeteer.
It sounds like probably you must have had something to do with them feeling like they could go out and do all these amazingly different productions with sounds like quite different approaches to the possibilities of the form.
Yes, and the course was changed. It was integrated into a multidisciplinary masters, where there were all the different practitioners, the writers, the dramaturgs, the designers, the makers. They were all together in one course, and they made performances together in collaboration. Collaboration was the name of the game in that course.
And now I think our friend Cariad Astles is teaching in Central School right now, but the program is different from when you were there.
Yes, and I'm afraid that the bachelor's, which she has been heading for some years, that's coming to an end. And that's a bit of a tragedy for me, but it's there's some hope that it might be turned into another master's.
It's a bit ironic that that program is facing those challenges at a time when puppetry is kind of everywhere, when puppetry has really flourished in the UK especially, but also in so many other places.
Indeed. And that must please you too.
Yeah, it's exciting. This image that we're looking at is you. I want to say that you're talking about Edward Gordon Craig, but am I wrong about that?
No, you're not wrong. And I have to tell you that Henryk has written a whole book on Gordon Craig, and it is unpublished in English. It is published in Polish, and I think one or two other languages, but we haven't been able to find a publisher in English, and it's a very good book, and it's certainly worth publishing.
Okay, so maybe a publisher will watch this forum we're doing and say, we need to do that. And of course, Edward Gordon Craig, and I don't know how much of this is arcane knowledge, but British actor and designer and puppeteer and proponent of puppetry from the late 19th century. I mean, he died in the 60s. I don't know if you ever met him, but he was totally influential in European stage design and puppetry, and also with the American puppet modernism that you mentioned earlier that I found interesting. Again and again, you'd see these people like Ellen van Valkenburg or from Chicago, Americans who saw Craig's writings and said, puppetry, that could be a real interesting form. So
he had quite a little influence, didn't he, in America?
Oh yeah, huge. Part of it was that his publications, he managed to place his publications in bookstores all across the United States. So I think he was smart about getting his word out there. But what do you recall what you were talking about in this? It looks like a pretty interesting presentation about Craig.
Well, it was a whole symposium and there were several speakers. and I was just concentrating on the book that Henryk had written,
Okay.
and also on the character of Craig, which I find absolutely fascinating. He was one of the research subjects and I had a few of them, like Garcia Lorca was one of them, who I was sort of half in love with the idea of them, wished so much I'd known them.
Right, right. Yes, he was an amazing character. Yeah.
Yeah, he was. I'm very glad that I wasn't married to him, because he would just go around picking up wives and dropping children everywhere. I hate to think how many children he actually had.
Quite a character. Yes, indeed. Yeah. That sounds like a subject that we could be explored for quite a while, but I wanted to think about, head towards thinking about your own book. And then, but with a brief interlude, this is a photograph of you together with people I mentioned before, Alelu Curtin, to your
Nancy is still a dear friend.
Yeah, and Nancy Staub to Alelu's left, and Penny Jones on
Which
the
is
right.
Penny Jones? I don't know Penny Jones. Is that Penny Jones?
Yeah, on the right with the red hair there.
No, I'm certainly met her, but I don't know her very well.
Carol Sterling on the far
Carol
left.
I stayed with in New York.
And Hua Zhang, who puppet arts graduate.
Yes. She was a protege of Bart's, wasn't she?
Yes, absolutely. Big student of and a collaborator with Bart on a number of projects. And then this is Jim Napolitano, the sole male there, also a puppet art student who's a graduate, who's a active puppeteer in Connecticut. And I apologize, I'm not quite sure who this woman is in the green.
Oh, that's Ingrid. That's
okay.
Albrecht Rosa's right hand.
Yes, okay, excuse me, I should know that. So a
Ingrid,
stellar
surname. Ingrid. Oh, somebody remind me.
Right, well, maybe we'll get that.
Somebody out there knows.
They'll write us and correct us. I should. And this, of course, was at our 2014 Puppeteers of America National Festival. But I wanted to get to this book, Puppetry, A Reader in Theater Practice, which came out in 2011. And as I understand it, I believe that to a great extent, it came out of your developing perspective on puppetry and what to think about or teach about puppetry from your work at Central School of Speech and Drama.
It is my kind of manifesto. It was a gathering together of everything major that I had learned about puppetry, and I put it all in that little book. And God, I never thought that I'd write it, but I did, and I'm very happy I did. And I'm still quite pleased with it.
And this is, again, it appears to me at this moment quite nerdy, but very exciting photograph of the table of contents of your book, which talks about approach and related arts and different techniques and performance, aesthetics, history. I think it's overall, it's a wonderful and kind of complete introduction to puppetry as practice and theory and history. So,
yes, there's not much about making puppets, I'm afraid, because I don't and I can't.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many wonderful books on the building of puppets that I thought it would be nice to have a book which was just about performing with them, producing them.
Am I right in thinking that you developed this idea of puppet-esque, this theory of puppet-esque?
Yes, something that isn't exactly a puppet, but it is puppet-esque. I would see portfolios of design students, and you could tell from the portfolios, from their drawings, that they had a feeling for puppets, and many of the work, much of the work was puppetesque.
And so does puppetesque refer to something that's not a puppet, but is related to puppets? What exactly does puppetesque mean?
No, that's exactly right.
Is it an object, for example, used in performance that's not a traditional form? I'm thinking that I run into this term a lot that you invented, so I wanted to clarify what you're thinking about with that term.
It's simply puppetry is a kind of sensibility that certain people have.
Right.
And sometimes the sensibility shows in the work, which is not necessarily puppetry, but it shows that puppet sensibility in the work. It might be in the design, it might be in the direction, it might be in the dramaturgy. I find this really lovely, and I'm always delighted when I come across it, of course.
Like when I think of that, I think of like a playwright like Samuel Beckett.
Yes,
I think, oh, the way I think of it, the term puppetesque seems very useful, but I think, oh, he's probably a person who gets puppets, and some like, I want to say some of his plays are just scenarios for object movement. I think of go ahead.
Barry Smith did a puppet show of one of the, what is it called? Act One or something.
Oh, Act Without Words.
Act Without Words.
Yeah.
One of the Act Without Words about the clown figure who goes to hang himself. He plays with rope. And Barry, it was one of the best things Barry ever did. It was a brilliant show. And Beckett himself saw it and approved it.
I remember talking with the puppet historian John McCormick from Ireland, who you no doubt know, and he said that at Trinity College in Dublin, that he and Beckett used to work together on puppet shows, which was pretty tantalizing. Yeah, I feel like I should have asked more about that. But I get that feeling, the puppet-esque with directors like Robert Wilson, like, that guy, he understands puppetry. Also the American avant-garde theater company Mabu Mines, which is
Ping
Chong. Also, a lot of visual theater, gestural theater, you can see is heading into the puppet-esque. So I think that's a very good term to help us understand how the more traditionally defined forms of puppetry, like hand puppets, rod puppets, marionettes, have spread into other forms and then into puppet-friendly or puppet-esque realms that might not even use puppets, but are continually maybe thinking of the possibilities of objects and performance.
It's certainly spread, and but sometimes when I'm with, for instance, my family, most of whom are magnificently uninterested in puppets, in spite of me, perhaps because of me, every time I will see something and I will say, look, that's a puppet, or it's puppetesque, and they won't really understand why. But you know what I mean. There's an awful lot on television advertisements, commercials. At the moment, I'm fascinated by a giant puppet made up of what can I call them? They're not cubes, and it's playing football.
Oh, really?
But it's huge. It's absolutely huge. It must be, at least 15 feet high, if not more.
Wonderful.
And it's a regular commercial. And I'm always delighted to see it because it is simply, it's really a puppet. It isn't even puppetesque. It is a puppet.
Right. And commercials or advertisements have long been a place where puppets are you are found, where they turn up all the time, I think because they're very effective means of communication. I'm looking at some of the questions and comments that have come in here, and okay. Right, and I'm sorry I didn't see these earlier, but
they haven't come up on my screen, I'm afraid, either.
Okay, so one is from the Ingrid Hoffer is the Albrecht Roser's colleague, and at a certain point, our friend Nancy Staub, who's been watching this, wrote "important and useful book," which I think must be her analysis of your book, your reader in theater practice.
Very kind of her.
Yes, indeed.
I think it's a bit of a shame that it's called a reader. I don't know that many people understand what that means. It used to mean a book which leads you to other books. So the bibliography is very important. But they've changed the name of the series now. And I'm sorry that I'm stuck until I have another edition with a reader.
Right, a reader. Our Claudia Orenstein and Dacia Posner and I edited this book about puppetry. They call it a companion, the Rutledge Companion to Puppetry. So I don't know if reader or
nice,
better than companion. Also, I wanted to mention Pupak Azampur Tabrizi in Tehran writes, "I am teaching your useful and wonderful book in my classes at the University of Tehran for puppet theater students." Do you know Pupak? Probably. I thought you may have met her.
No, I had some very nice friends from Iran through UNIMA, but they kind of, I think they've kind of disappeared. I have a horrible feeling that they're not alive anymore.
Pupak teaches puppetry at Tehran University, and of course there's an amazingly rich and strong collection or community of puppeteers in Iran right now that's doing amazing work. So
I am pleased to hear it.
I appreciate. Claudia Orenstein writes, "Oh, Beckett and puppets, someone needs to research and write that article or book." Good. And Nancy writes, all Ping Chong, Robert Wilson, and Mahbub Mines all incorporated puppets, which is
Indeed,
true too. And Sean Myatt, who's in, I think he's still teaching at Nottingham University.
Yes, he is. I know him well.
He wrote, "I get it too." I'm not sure what that's in response to because I didn't pay attention when it first came up. So those are some comments about your work. There, I think if people have specific questions for you online, they could answer them now or ask them now. Excuse me. Here's a very sort of American question. Like, you received this order from an M.B.E for your services of puppetry from Queen Elizabeth. What is that like? I mean, I first heard about that kind of honor when the Beatles were awarded an M.B.E, but
I think they gave them back, didn't they?
They
gave
so.
Their M.B.Es back. I'm disgusted.
So.
It's the biggest thrill. It was really the biggest thrill. The Queen. You have just a minute or two with the Queen when she gives you the medal, and she said, "I don't think I've ever given a medal to puppetry before."
Oh. Okay.
And in fact, she'd given it to an Australian. Well, she in person would not have done.
Okay.
But and then after me, Lindy Wright was given.
Oh, that's great.
But a little bit later.
And what's that like? Like, do you go to Buckingham Palace and
yes.
and this and then you have to figure out what you're going to wear and
Yes.
how you approach. And do you kneel, and does she touch you with a sword or something?
Only when you're knighted, only when you're going to be a lady or a sir.
Okay, so that's next.
Not even a lady. No.
Okay.
But the whole thing was such an honor. It was so beautifully organized, but it was quite interesting. Well, never mind. I won't go into that now, but there is a hierarchy of these medals for the British Empire.
Right.
The British Empire, which no longer exists.
Right.
And the lowest of the medals is the M.B.E, and then you have the O.B.E, and then you have the C.B.E. But the M.B.E has nearly all the women, and is the lowest. And Germaine Greer called it the Secretary's Award.
The secretary, Germaine Greer, the great feminist writer. Okay,
yes.
Great. I think you told me that if you had another child, that the child could be christened in Westminster.
In St. Paul's Cathedral.
St. Paul's Cathedral.
Crypt, yes.
Right, but like that's not something you're probably planning on, perhaps. I don't know.
When you're 90, you're not terribly fertile.
No, okay. So, Pupak Azampur Tabrizi asks for your email address, and I can share your email address if it's okay with you with Pupak. Penny.
Pupak spelled P-U-P-A-R-T.
P-O-U-P-A-K. Okay.
No, I don't know them at all.
Yeah. Okay. And Matthew Cohen, I know you know Matthew, who he headed a puppet program at Royal Holloway, University of London for quite a while. He says, Penny, what has been happening in the UK puppet scene since the start of the pandemic?
Oh, a lot of people have suffered very badly. The theatre is in pieces. No theatre performances have been allowed until I think last week, on the last 10 days. And even then, they're only allowed, they have to have this social distancing. And it has been catastrophic for the theatre. The government released a lot of money towards the arts a few days ago. And the Arts Council has given to some of the puppet companies. One of my favorite children's companies is Garlic, and they've been given a grant from the Arts Council. And the Arts Council has very limited funds, but they're doing their best.
Nancy, thank you for that. Nancy Staub says, mention some of the important work of former students you inspired.
Oh my goodness. You're asking a lot of an old brain and an old memory. Well, no, it's really, really difficult. I've got, well, Garlic worked with me, and you know, if you put an old person on the spot like that,
right? I was thinking, I'm sorry.
Evaporates.
I didn't want to put you.
Nancy, I'll try and do better later on, dear, but not at the moment.
Maybe Nancy has a particular idea of who she's thinking of. I wanted to ask you, thinking of Matthew's question, what if you have a thought about COVID aside, the situation of puppetry in the UK today, you know, especially given the fact that you have a pretty long-term perspective on it, you know, what's your sense of what's happening, and despite like what's happened with the Central School of Speech and Drama program, what's going on in the UK with puppetry that you find interesting?
Well, I think now puppetry is integrated into the theatre scene, and performers are simply aware of it. Some directors use it. Well, it pops up in an awful lot of performances, productions nowadays. Puppetry is simply one more in the theatre toolbox. It's like mask work and dance even. I've just seen a question from Nell Ackroyd about wearing masks. I hate the damn things. I absolutely hate them.
You have to wear your mask, Penny.
No, I'm not going to unless I absolutely have to. I have some friends who are very, very risk averse, but mostly, you know, I've just been in my house for months now. I've hardly ventured out.
Well, you don't have to wear your mask in your house.
I don't have to wear, and I don't have to wear it around friends but the only time you absolutely have to wear it is when you go on any kind of public transport.
Right.
And also if I'm going to a clinic in a hospital tomorrow, and I shall wear it to go there. But on the whole, I used to be terrified of masks as a child. But I was fascinated doing the research that I did for the chapter on masks in my book, and ventriloquists. Gosh, I learned a lot about ventriloquists.
Yeah. Nell Ackroyd says, wear your mask, Penny. Which
no, I won't. I'm a contrarian.
But you are wearing it when you go to the clinic and on the public transportation.
Yes.
And maybe when you meet some stranger walking down the street.
But if somebody comes to my house,
and
I don't know where they've been, for instance, if anybody is delivering things, they have to stay on the doorstep, and hand the stuff to me by either leaving it on the doorstep or throwing it into the hall. Yes, one has to be careful. I mean, it's a terrible disease. It's an absolutely appalling disease.
Right. Especially for those of us who are past a certain age.
Yes.
It sounds to me like you're conducting yourself in a way that wants to be safe and healthy. So in the US, it's become a real political issue about whether or not you wear a mask, but I don't think you're.
Well, I think they're about to make it almost mandatory. Is that the word? Is that the way you pronounce it? Mandatory.
Mandatory.
To wear masks in the street when you're out and about. Certainly in shops, it's already, you have to wear them in shops.
Right, and Heather Henson also says, take care of yourself, Penny. We want you to wear a mask. Do it for your fans.
Thank you, Heather.
And T. Penfield notes the Queen's masks are color coordinated.
I haven't seen her in a mask yet. Have you seen her in a mask?
I don't think so, but I'm not paying attention.
But you have, yes, well, let's not go into that subject because it's very depressing.
Okay. Let's see, and we're getting near the end of our time together, which has been really fascinating and inspiring and wonderful.
Can I talk just a little bit more, John, about some of the thoughts that I've had about puppetry and its importance in life, not just in theatre.
Exactly.
That it's an important contribution to our understanding of theatre, that the best actors can use puppetry in a really creative way, and the best designers, and there are some brilliant designers, can incorporate puppetry into their designs. And I just think that it's part of our DNA. If everybody is a puppeteer when they're born and they're presented with their first toys, and it's a beautiful thing because of its relationship to the beauty of fine art, and I'm really being very, I think I'm getting tired, but you see, and the importance of it, and the importance of understanding it and being in tune with it, I think is a huge life enhancer. Certainly enhanced my life.
I totally agree. I appreciate you articulating so directly and eloquently what I think a lot of us feel all the time in the puppet world, and also for everything you've done to expand that perspective through your work in so many different areas, in UNIMA and Puppet Center, and your work in animations, and with Jurkowski's work, and your own book, and your own act, doing all sorts of stuff. Oh my gosh. So I think that let's see, Peter Ling asks, Penny, when you finished what you do, what would you like to say that you did?
I think we've covered most of it.
I think you
I have to go back over it again. Do
okay.
I?
Good. So we have to get the Jurkowski book on Edward Gordon Craig printed.
Yes.
And I think we, at this point, thank you for your generosity. It's after 9 o'clock in London, and I appreciate that you did this live with us. It's kind of past my bedtime if I were in London, which I'm not.
It's 10 here.
Oh, 10. It's after 10 right now.
That's all right. My usual bedtime is 11:30.
I'm thankful that so many of your fans in the UK and in the US have participated in this program. It's always a delight to speak with you, and I appreciate you know, learning more about your work and what's influenced you. So thank you, Penny Francis.
Thank you, John. It's always a pleasure to be with you and to see you, and you do wonderful work too.
You're so gracious and generous. That's awesome. So thinking of our viewers, I actually don't have in front of me the list of the next workshops, but there'll be puppet workshops tomorrow and next week. Nature Puppets workshop tomorrow. There's some people will be taking a little bit of time off in the coming weeks over the summer. The next Puppet Forum, as I mentioned earlier, will be next Thursday, the 23rd, with Terry Silvio. And after that, our guests will include Steve Tillis, Frank Proshin, Matthew Cohen, Raphael Fleury, and Dacia Posner. Felicia Cooper, a talented puppet arts graduate student, is doing a cranky workshop called Let's Get Cranking.
We don't have crankies in England.
You don't?
No, we don't have. We haven't the faintest idea what a cranky will like.
Well, people can watch this workshop with
Yes.
Felicia on the 22nd of July and learn. And then Elise, who's been working with us today on Friday 24th, is doing a fish puppet workshop. So
That'll be
that's
smelly.
happening. We wanted to let you know that all of these forums and all of the workshops, for that matter, all of our online programming is available on our Facebook channel after the event, and also on our YouTube channel after the event. So you can let your friends know that they could watch this forum with Penny Francis anytime they want to on YouTube. So
great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Penny. Thanks everybody for watching. Happy summer, happy July.
Yes.
Stay safe and healthy.
Yes.